Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Hey, everybody out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. This is your co-host, John Broer, welcoming you to the Boss Hole Chronicles. It's good to have you with us. And joining me today is my remarkable and amazing friend and partner, Sara Best, the best there is. Just remember that. Sara, how you doing?
Sake. I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm good. I am really excited about our conversation today. And today's episode is really more of a, well, let's say a round table with the two of us and including all of our listeners out there to pull your chair up to the round table to talk about a really critical subject, something we've been hearing a lot about. We are deeply involved in this topic. And Sara, I'm just going to throw it over to you to share with our listeners what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you, John. Yes, our subject matter today is psychological safety. And it should be a familiar term to anybody working in the business world. If you've been paying attention, it is being talked about quite a bit, much more so than in years past. I think that in our world, John, we see psychological safety as an answer to things like quiet quitting, the Great Resignation, all the uniquely termed, dynamics that we're watching happen in the workplace that are actually not new. They may seem new to some people who are kind of waking up to the fact that, wow, I better take good care of my people. I better focus on my people if I want to keep my people and hire the right people. So psychological safety becomes a critical soil in which organizations have to work with their people and can work with their people. So we are going to unpack that today for our listeners.
And if you think about another term that, while you were going through that, Sara, that is a long-standing term, and we talk about it all the time, is disengagement. So even something as very familiar as disengagement, which seems kind of elusive and squishy, I get what, I think people get what disengagement is, but how do you quantify that? How do you measure it? And psychological safety absolutely is a factor in that.
It is. And we first have to acknowledge it's the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, professor at Harvard. We could go on and on about her credentials, but her pretty amazing work, not only with the Aristotle Project, which was a study done a number of years ago at Google. This was a study that she spearheaded internally to look at teams and to try to diagnose or determine what makes a team successful. And of all the great factors that were, identified through the research and the study that she did, psychological safety was the linchpin. Without it, none of the other factors could be at play in an effective team. So it's important to think about. And, when in a world where a lot of people are kind of hardwired to just fit in and go along, and I don't want to rock the boat. Hey, the stakes are pretty high here at my organization. I don't want to lose my job. There's so many reasons why people don't speak up, but psychological safety is in fact the medium and the environment that helps us overcome those natural and self-imposed barriers to people speaking up and being honest, people asking questions. In a minute, John, I know you will unpack the true definition of psychological safety, but I think the other thing we need to acknowledge about it is we are in a time where innovation is essential. Learning and growth and innovation in our businesses, in the way we address issues and challenges we face globally, it's going to be how we survive and thrive. And you can't get to innovation and learning unless and until there is psychological safety.
Absolutely. I love how you put it, Sara. That is the reason why now, why we really have to look at this now. Actually, we should have been looking at this for years, because Dr. Edmondson's work goes back, oh my goodness, 15, 20 years. I mean, even when she was starting her research within the healthcare industry, is that correct? Or the healthcare circles, is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah. And the other part of why now is because I think many organizations are trying to break out of that command and control and that mindset that was generated way back in the industrial age when we did manufacturing. and this whole like, I'm the boss, you're the direct report, you just do what I say, and my job is to like have all the answers and tell you what to do, and your job is to perfectly produce this, size 8 tennis shoe. And, we are so far away from that now.
Right.
And it's so critical because we're clearly in the knowledge economy. There's this interdependence. Business outcomes are interdependent with relationships and collaboration. So in order to, and that's even taking into account that artificial intelligence continues, to impact and enhance would be one word, the way we do our business, that does not take away from the increasing need for us to work collaboratively together to get to the right answer. And that means that people are going to have to say what they think. They're going to have to ask questions. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the foundation of really what we're talking about today.
And we want our people, we need to move in the direction of making them or inviting them to be active participants in that process versus a utility.
Right.
In the industrial age, people were a utility, and we just haven't broken free. So let's do that. Yeah. Let's define psychological safety, and this comes directly out of the work of Dr. Edmondson. We are working with our clients on this very specifically because it can be diagnosed. You can measure psychological safety, but here's a definition. Psychological safety, we define as the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And a caveat to that is also having low interpersonal fear and a high degree of comfort to challenge the status quo. And so another way of looking at that is when an organization or a team or a leader establishes psychological safety, they are destigmatizing failure and taking the fear away of failing and being able to point out mistakes. Yeah. And I'll bet you we have listeners out there, Sarah, managers, supervisors that are saying, oh, yeah, oh, no, my people know that they would not be punished or humiliated. I mean, that's
door is open. They can come and tell me anything.
Right. And in reality, how do you actually know that without measuring it? How do
John,
you actually know? Yeah. Go.
How do you know? I got to go back to something you said a second ago.
Sure.
About how we handle mistakes. Mm-hmm. There are people who are hardwired for perfection. And a lot of them happen to be managers and supervisors. And while we say, oh yeah, mistakes are welcome, that's how we learn.
Right.
There are people that don't even know that what is driving the bus for them is this need for perfection. And that, making a mistake it brings incredible risk. And their standards are so high that they don't have an appropriate response to mistakes. And in this climate that we're trying to build of psychological safety inside the organization, there has to be a welcoming for mistakes so that we can learn from them. John, I know you talk a lot about the dangers of low psychological safety. Do you want to touch on that for our listeners for a minute? What happens if there isn't psychological safety? And by the way, it doesn't magically occur. Like we don't just all of a sudden say, we are such great people. Right. And our organization is so wonderful and efficient that it's okay. We have that soil. No, you have to intentionally build it. So what happens if you don't have it?
So really there are two things that are indicative of low psychological safety. One is dangerous silence. And the other one is avoidable failure. And let me just give you a definition of each. So with dangerous silence, this is where people who are aware of the risks of a situation, but they dare not speak up for fear of being called out or punished for it. So they know something's going on and they're not about to open their mouths because either in the past they themselves have been the recipient of a negative response, or they've seen it happen in their organization. So dangerous silence is just because people are reticent and quiet and not speaking up. So avoidable failure. When people are more focused on avoiding failure, they tend to make more mistakes than if psychological safety levels would have been high. So they just won't even try because, and how many times do we hear that? I mean, we'll work with a team and they'll say, I'm not sure why I would go to any great lengths because I don't want to set myself up for failure. And when you mention quiet quitting, that's almost indicative of, listen, I'm going to do just what's expected of me, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to punch clear and then go live my life and then come back the next day. I mean, to a degree, that's that feels like a certain level of failure avoidance.
It does. And we could put a price tag on that if we calculated appropriately the cost of that inefficiency, lack of discretionary effort. We could actually quantify that. I think most organizations should take a stab at that so they could shock themselves with the reality of, wow, here's what that lack of attention is costing us. And I think the other side of it, which is super scary to me, is dangerous silence. And of course, we have massive examples, many examples of disaster that happened as a result of people not speaking up. Can I share a couple, John?
Absolutely. We love examples.
Yeah. So in 1986, NASA and people within NASA warned that the Space Shuttle Challenger had a potential fatal flaw. And it was the fact that certain panels on the space shuttle would not operate well and function well in cold temperatures. So in January, on a cold morning, when officials decided to proceed ahead, after 73 seconds, as we all know, because most of us watched it happen, the Challenger broke apart, killing 7 crew members. And I think when we did our research, 17% of Americans watched that on TV. But an investigative commission understood and found out that, the decision-making process was not informed by the awareness of that critical flaw. In other words, people didn't speak up and say, why are we doing this? The decision-making process proceeded and the shuttle launched. So another good example is General Motors and their CEO, Mary Barra. She stated that the company's corporate culture had helped suppress the voices of employees alarmed about safety issues. So the company culture was one that, if you spoke up, you might pay for it down the road. And I think in 2014, it was when General Motors admitted that there was knowledge of an issue with their ignition switch safety, and it had been in their awareness for 10 years. So they had issued a recall, but there were at least 54 crashes, at least 100 people died. And as the issue unfolded, it was, certainly made clear that information was suppressed and critical higher ups and decision-making authority were not challenged and action wasn't taken as it needed to. And I have one more example. I wish we had some really good examples of avoidable failure, but I think these are more dramatic when we talk about the dangerous silence.
Right.
So the third and final example, which is one we know personally, John, in a healthcare setting, there was a shortage of staff, and due to scheduling challenges, one particular area and unit was understaffed, and it could have been easily corrected. Actually, as the organization discovered this issue and researched it or tried to investigate it, but as a result, one of their patients fell out of bed and died, and was not responded to appropriately. So I think, there's such significance. And so it's good to touch upon the dangers of low psychological safety. It's not a nice to have. It really becomes a must have if we are going to fulfill our missions to the best that we can and save lives and make sure bad stuff doesn't happen.
And again, to their credit, after the fact, obviously post the tragic result, I mean, in the case of this healthcare provider, I mean, they went back through and looked at the causation, and almost exclusively you could see this person didn't speak up. This person didn't speak up. These were things that should have been surfaced and brought to the attention. And the deeper question is why? What are the circumstances that don't, or the drivers that did not allow for somebody to expose or reveal that? And there are 3 drivers, just really quick, and to share with the audience, is that there are 3 drivers of psychological safety, because it's not just on the leader. It's just not on the team manager.
Amen. That's right.
There's 2 other really critical variables that balance that out. One is or one has to do with the team relationships within the team itself, aside from the team leader. I mean, the team relationships absolutely influence the psychological safety within the team. And so if you do not have healthy relationships, if you do not have cohesive, very transparent and trusting relationships, psychological safety will break down. And then the other one is the organizational context. So the organizational context is more globally how it is perceived the organization deals with openness, transparency, mistakes, failure. I mean, if there is a suppression around or overall of just like, don't say anything. If you see something, just don't say it. It'll get corrected. It's not your issue. Don't worry about it. I mean, that's organizational context.
It is. And John, I have to point out here that we work with many small and mid-sized businesses, many of which are family owned or have, family influence leadership. And this is where I like to think about, gosh, we do often see replicated in a business the family dynamic of the ownership and the leadership. And in many cases where families experience trauma or addiction, alcoholism, things like that, there's a don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. And I watch it play out. I see it play out very often in our organizations that we work with, that, we're not going to talk about that. It's not cool. It's not safe. You're going to get hurt if you do. It's uncomfortable. So I just want to acknowledge that it's a human condition. And the most effective and brave and courageous leaders and organizations recognize this is the natural way we would likely respond to stuff. But we have to be bolder. We have to overcome the need to stay comfortable, the need to stay in a lane, and try to build some muscle around this stuff.
For sure, because the cost of not doing that is astronomical. It really is.
It is. And John, you talked about cohesiveness and trust on a team. We do a lot of work with executive leadership teams around building that trust. And we incorporate psychological safety, but this might be a good time to just differentiate trust and psychological safety.
Good.
Because they are unique and different. Whereas psychological safety is the belief that your environment is safe for interpersonal risk taking. So it's the risk isn't too high for me to speak up. Trust is what you give other people. It's you give people the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk, and they give you the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk. And I think that the differentiation there, trust is very personal. It's a choice. It's almost a verb. Whereas psychological safety is more of a group phenomenon. It's an environment and a medium and a soil that you build together so that trust is easier, so that making that choice to, and choosing to trust others becomes easier. Psychological safety says you can feel secure in the knowledge that your team trusts you and will support you, not change the way they feel about you, even if you need help, make a mistake, or need to take a risk.
Right.
So trust is the converse of that. You may trust your teammates to possess the competence they need in order to do their jobs. And you may trust them to follow through on a commitment they made to you or to the rest of the team. And you trust them to act professionally, ethically, and honestly. And in turn, this builds the group level of psychological safety. So it's really a personal deal. This trust is a choice. It's something each of us has to address and work on, but it lends itself to building more psychological safety.
And at its core, psychological safety is about performance.
Yeah. That's good point, John.
Yeah.
You better say that again. Say that again.
If anybody is out there thinking about, well, how do I know if I have psychological safety? Look at the performance of your teams. If generally at its core, psychological safety is about performance. So if you have teams, if you have divisions, if you have, and again, it's really about the team unit, but if a team is struggling and performance is in question, chances are you are dealing with a psychological safety issue, which can be diagnosed. That's the one thing that I want all of our listeners to understand. Psychological safety is not a squishy sort of ethereal concept. It is a very real variable about performance, and we can measure that. We're doing it all the time. And so and I would encourage our listeners, look into the show notes. We're gonna put up a couple of just one pagers that talk about psychological safety and what its components are, sort of, a little bit of a refresh of what we talked about here. But if you're concerned about psychological safety on a team, reach out to us. Just email us at, John at realgoodventures.com or Sara at realgoodventures.com. This is too critical to just sort of guess at it.
Well, and John, I appreciate you emphasize that this is really about results. Psychological safety is necessary to achieve optimum results and ROI. And I don't know any chief leader who isn't concerned about the bottom line, especially now. I mean, there are other benefits of high psychological safety. You do have greater innovation. So there's sharing of knowledge, ideas, there's collaborative thinking. You have improved team learning. Mm-hmm. So higher quality interactions and an ability to navigate changing environments. And I think we're in some of the most challenging conditions ever, but that's how you're going to get through it.
Yep.
Higher work quality, greater employee wellness, those things and the focus on people have to continue to be a priority. They absolutely do. John, question for you. Would it be helpful if we sort of broke down the 4 key domains of psychological safety?
Yeah, I think so. Please do it.
Okay. Well, we can take turns. I'll start with inclusion and diversity. Because that's being talked about quite a bit. It's not a new idea. Let's just be honest. But I think people are recognizing the significance and the importance of inclusion and diversity. Again, it's to get to the best answer possible. It's to create solutions that we haven't had before, that we haven't thought of before. And we are in a time where innovation and learning are absolutely critical, I think, to our survival and our success. But inclusion and diversity is simply when team members feel included. They are more inclined to speak up, contribute, and add to the group. And, there's in many organizations, John, we see this sometimes on leadership teams, there's an in-group and an out-group. Mm-hmm. And you know when you're on the inside because you get firsthand exposure to the CEO, you get to participate in certain activities, you get knowledge and insider knowledge first. And there are other people that don't get that. And this goes beyond, it certainly doesn't disclude or take us away from race, gender, ethnicity, and all the other ways in which we are diverse. But it's first and foremost, it's the opportunity to have your opinion and your person valued as a part of that in-group. Well, and the second one, attitude toward risk and failure. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Teams that hold mistakes against each other risk a lack of control and forward momentum. And I think, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But we may say on the one hand that we're good about mistakes and we learn from them, but actually it's a whole different vibe when you're on the front line. Mm-hmm. Willingness to help. This is where teams become unsafe when people are not willing to help each other or feel appreciated by team members. We talk, John, you and I both, to a lot of high-level executives who just feel undervalued, underutilized, and they don't believe they're allowed to go outside of their lane to ask for help. In fact, it's seen as weakness, and they're stuck. They're absolutely stuck. But on a leadership team, you have to ask yourself inside an organization: are we moving so fast and so hard that we can't even take the time to stop and help each other? Because I got so much on my plate. We often hear leaders say this: I didn't want to impose on anybody. Everybody else is so busy. Right. Yeah, we're all sinking. The whole ship is sinking and we're all sinking together. But we have to break out of that mindset and create an environment where it is not only good to ask for help, but it's actually valued and it's rewarded. Like, hey, I don't have all the answers. And of course, this one, willingness to help, that is founded upon this idea of vulnerability. Yeah. If the chief leader isn't able to say, I don't know the answer, but I got you great people around me, let's figure it out. Or, you know what, I was driving hard on this because I thought it was the right idea, but I was wrong. I made a mistake. So we got to backpedal, and I want you to help me figure this out differently. That's what we mean by willingness to help. And open conversation is the fourth. A team that is open and candid, and they're able to have these candid conversations, they can tackle harder problems together. So in the work we do with executive teams, when we're trying to help them master this idea of conflict and inviting dissension and conflict, and as Patrick Lencioni calls it, passionate, unfiltered debate into the group, it takes practice. It's really kind of the midpoint between artificial harmony yes nodding and niceness, and the other end of the spectrum, which is mean-spirited attacks. So in the middle there is this candor and integrity and willingness to kick the tires on stuff and to challenge each other for the good of either the mission, the client, the outcome that we desire, the best decision. Lencioni calls it, the pursuit of truth. Dissension and conflict is nothing more than the pursuit of truth. So these are the four kind of key domains of psychological safety
that we can measure, that can absolutely be measured. And one thing you make me think of, Sara, is for leaders and managers that are thinking, okay, I want to create more open dialogue. I want people to feel safe about bringing forward issues, mistakes, problems, challenging the status quo. And I just want our leaders out there to recognize that sometimes how a person communicates may not be, it may hit you in a way that you feel kind of, I like the word you use, crunchy, or it kind of hits you hard. But I would advise to always assume benign intent.
Yes.
I mean, just assume that okay, if the words or the phrases or the inflection hits you wrong, don't assume that this is a personal attack on you. It could be the best way this person knows how to articulate this issue. And that's where we need our leaders to get, embrace that humility and get away from hubris and, stifle that ego. Because just realize that the message may not be well articulated, but the meaning and the intent is very genuine and in earnest.
Yeah. Again, in that regard, we have to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yep.
I was thinking, John, kind of as a closing set of points, just to give people an opportunity to kind of evaluate their own team, their own leadership team, or the team in which for which they're a member. If you find that there's a lot of learning happening on the team, that there is a consistent, what we'll call high performance, like you're getting things done and people aren't suffering, chances are you have a high degree of psychological safety. And the good news about that is you've probably worked hard to achieve it, and you just need to continue to work to keep it there. So to be honest, and I know even for our own team, John, we did a psychological safety assessment about a year ago or so, maybe a year and a half ago. And it was our entree into the opportunity to measure psychological safety and bring that as a tool into our repertoire, because it's so powerful. But there isn't probably a day that goes by that I don't think about, number one, how high our scores were, but also how I have to continue to lean in. It's not like, oh, hey, we made it and I don't have to speak up again. No, I think this relationship stuff is always important and requires us sometimes to get uncomfortable and, to say things or ask questions or express opinions that might be challenging for others on the team. And so it's not a one and done. I think the other thing is for thinking about, just evaluating your own team, if there's inconsistency in your performance of any kind, but there's still wins and successes, but you can't seem to necessarily pull a thread of success through all your activities, chances are you just need to pay attention to this and put some intentional work into addressing how and why psychological safety might be hindered.
Yeah.
And then the other key points would be, what, if there's no rhythm to your high quality work, if there's such inconsistency and you feel like you're losing ground, or that there's toxic stuff going on in the team, that people are back channel politicking, they're assassinating character behind people's backs. If that that's likely going on, you can be assured that mistakes are being hidden. You don't have access to all the important and critical information you need to make decisions moving into this continued, volatile economic time.
Yeah.
It is essential and imperative that you take a look at this, because it's not that hard to build it. It's not like you have to start from ground zero. So I just want to give our leaders a context about that.
And as we would always say, just please don't guess at it, measure it. I mean, we can help with that, but just don't guess at it. And as I would just remind everybody, check the show notes. We'll post up a couple of informational pieces about psychological safety that is at the core of the work that we do. But Sara, great topic. It was awesome.
Thanks. And John, you too. I think it's safe to say that we are anticipating a pretty profound thought leader on psychological safety as a guest on the podcast in the next 30 days or so. So we'll keep our Boss Hole Transformation Nation tuned. We'll keep them apprised of those details, but we look forward to that soon.
Very exciting. Yeah. Huge, exciting guest. So anyway, with Sara, it was great. Thanks everybody for listening in, and we'll see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles. We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.